Welcome to Clinical Lab Chat, part of the MedCore Podcast Network. I'm Chris Wolski, Director of Business Intelligence for CLP, and today I'll be speaking with BD's Dr. Jeff Andrews about the implications of BD's recent STI survey for testing access. We'll be talking about testing access and the need for just better health education in general. Jeff is Vice President of Medical Affairs for Integrated Diagnostic Solutions at BD, and he is also a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist who has provided care in community settings in both metropolitan Toronto and Washington, D.C. He has also provided care in academic settings, such as an associate professor at Duke University Medical Center and at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. So, Jeff, welcome to Clinical Lab Chat. I think we're going to have a really, hopefully, a very interesting conversation, particularly in light of the BD survey. So, with STIs rates reaching record highs, the CDC unfortunately puts the infection rates at 1 in 5 Americans, which is just seems really through the roof. I think BD's survey is super well timed and certainly is shedding light on some of the really important issues surrounding testing and healthcare in general. So, Jeff, there were some really striking stats in the survey. And two that really stood out to me were the low rates of gynecological exams for Asian, Black, and Hispanic women. They're all at about 10%. The other thing that struck me is that only 19% of women report that their healthcare providers have discussed the types of tests that are available for their symptoms. Now, what are some of the other striking statistics that came out of the survey that the laboratorian audience should know about? And what does that really say about healthcare for women in general?
Thanks, Chris, and it's great to be here. I just want to explain a bit more. The numbers of Asian, Black, and Hispanic women who have not had a gynecologic exam numbered in the realm of 10%. There was some variation, whereas in white women it was 4%. So they were women of color were as much 3 times less likely to have had a gynecologic exam. That was one of the points. Absolutely, the fact that only 19% said their provider was explaining the tests they were ordering or getting seems very low. And as you pointed out, this is an epidemic that keeps increasing, not decreasing. And one of the reasons for it is lack of awareness about the diseases, some of the symptoms, or the fact that they can be asymptomatic, and certainly about testing. So there's also an access problem that you'll probably ask me about because I know you're interested in that.
I will be asking that.
Yeah. Even when women are accessing healthcare, they're not receiving information during the visit. So that's disappointing. And we found that the women in the survey reported that 82% thought their provider could have told them more about STIs. 79% thought their provider could have told them more about vaginal infection. And 82% also thought they could have been better informed about treatment options for both STIs and vaginal infections. Of the women who had a vaginal infection, only 37% thought that their healthcare provider was able to diagnose their symptoms and prescribe the appropriate treatment after one visit. In other words, they were dissatisfied with what happened following that visit, maybe had to go back for more visits. Right.
And certainly that's a drain on the in a more general way. That's a drain on the healthcare system in and of itself. If you have to go back multiple times for treatments or to address other issues that have come up. So, as you indicated, and as regular listeners know, healthcare access is something that really interests me, and I think it's a really important thing that we all need to talk about a lot more. And that comes particularly in light for our laboratory audience of another statistic from an earlier survey. This one from the Lancet. I think it was last year or the year before. I think it was last year that study came out, that 47% of people worldwide don't have access to basic medical tests. I think some of them including some basic gynecological tests as well, in particular. Now, is part of what's fueling the STI epidemic a lack of access to these, very crucial and basic tests for STIs? And even more to the point, how are we supposed to address the epidemic without testing, since testing overwhelmingly is relied on to make healthcare decisions? So it seems like we're kind of in a vicious circle here a little bit.
Yes, Chris, I think that Lancet quote you're giving there is probably from WHO. And yes, access to healthcare diagnostics and therapeutics is a factor. There's other factors that we've touched on: knowledge, condom use, things like that. You could say,
Right.
"Oh well, we're in the United States. We're not in the whole world." But if we look across STI statistics from CDC, we see that states like Mississippi and Louisiana have very high rates, matching some of the global rates. And so the problem here is really underserved communities that have less access to all types of healthcare, including this one.
Right.
Don't necessarily have uh, the resources.
Right. Now, I know I'm in California, and BD. I know that they worked with Planned Parenthood up in the Bay Area to get some testing provided to women who may not have access or have the economic ability to pursue testing or healthcare in general. So is that something as well? I mean, California, you think we're a big state, we're always at the forefront of everything, Silicon Valley, and we have this huge epidemic going on. I mean, is that kind of a model? Is that more of a model of what needs to be done in terms of getting access, maybe starting from particularly those underserved communities and some of the people that the statistics that we were talking about earlier, and reaching those women who are in those communities who might not have the access that other folks have.
You're right that Medicaid clinics within states and county healthcare, as well as Planned Parenthood and federally qualified health clinics, do offer these services. But not everyone's aware of that, or
Right.
aware that they are someone who may be at risk and should be screened, either based on age or other factors. Another one of the disturbing statistics is the 32% increase in congenital syphilis, babies born with syphilis.
Yeah.
Because there should be a 100% screening for that. It means women aren't having the prenatal screening.
Right.
So in many of these STIs that we're talking about, gonorrhea, chlamydia, trichomoniasis, syphilis, even HIV, can be asymptomatic for long periods of time. And so that may be part of the problem too, is the lack of recognition for that.
Yeah, I mean, this is, so let's talk about testing for a second, just in general. I mean, should STI screening and testing, do you think, in your opinion, do you think that should become kind of as basic as checking for A1C or some of the other basic tests that we're all getting tested for, cholesterol, etc., that we're all getting tested for from the time we're in our 20s or even younger? Do you think that should become more of a go-to sort of test, if I could use that term, or more of a universal testing? Should we have more universal testing, in your opinion? Make this part of the menu that we're all getting tested for. Men and women are getting tested for.
I'd like to refer to the current U.S. guidelines that are from the CDC or the Organization for OBGYNs or for Primary Care or the United States Preventive Task Force Services. They recommend testing based on age under 26, but not universal testing. And then testing in pregnancy and testing for people who have risk factors. And the risk factors include unprotected sex with more than one sex partner, drug use, and other sorts of things like that. So there's definitely large numbers of the U.S. who are high risk, but there are also people who may not consider themselves to be high risk that also have an STI. As you said, it's one in 5 people in the United
Right.
States at any given moment have an STI.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about let's get into that then a little bit. Understanding. Another thing that struck me from the survey is just the general lack of understanding about health in general. There was just a couple of statistics that it's obvious that the respondents really just didn't understand certain basic healthcare concepts or issues relating to their health. What we really saw, and to broaden this out just a little bit, and I think this is important to put it maybe in this context, we really saw that during the pandemic, and I know I heard a lot of really wrong-headed and wrong ideas about health from my family, friends, and acquaintances about some really bad ideas. So, and really, and I'd say bad. I wouldn't even say silly. I would just say bad and uninformed and ignorant in that just how stunningly badly we're educated about our health. How bad is our health education, particularly around sexual health? Again, as you as a professional, how bad is it really, and what do we do about it? Particularly in the climate that we're in now. I don't want to get in politics too much, but how do we fix this? How do we do this? I mean, we're having an epidemic here in California, and as you pointed out in other parts of the country. How do we address this? How do we improve this, and how do we address it?
Yeah, I was a little surprised by this survey, but we did a similar Harris poll a few months ago around HPV-caused cancers, and found out that the knowledge about HPV was much lower than what we see in this survey. And again, the need for more education, when you work in the field, it's surprising that everyone doesn't know what you know. So there's
right.
for more education that came out. Now, among these women, there were 1,000 women over the age of 18. A majority, 77%, said they were knowledgeable about vaginal infections. I think because that's fairly common. It's the number one reason for seeking GYN or urgent care. So they felt like they knew about that, but they were less knowledgeable about STIs, which is not surprising. And so there's different ways that you could receive education, kind of push-pull in a sense. So you could go look into it, and it's fairly easy to find. As you were pointing out when you asked me the question, there's also a lot of misinformation. So for STIs, I would direct people to go to the CDC because they have good information for lay people. But then what was disturbing to me about the survey was that even when someone was in with symptoms or asking about vaginitis or STIs, they still weren't receiving information, or the notion that they knew they had a test, but they didn't know why that test or what the test was. So we could do better as a clinical healthcare system in informing people at the moment, because that was a teachable moment.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. To switch gears a little bit, but away from women's health. But it's interesting. And there was a survey, I think, or a study that came out, I think, about Mpox and about how that really got tamped down because of the at-risk populations really understood. There's an issue here. They got the word out, and people who thought that either had symptoms or thought they may have been exposed were getting tested, and that really tamped that down. I mean, so you have and a lot of that came out of experiences with HIV back in the 80s and early 90s. So I mean, so you had in that case, you see what a really educated community looks, how they react and how they really kept those addressed that what could have been a really big issue, a big mess. And again, it wasn't perfect how everything was handled, but better certainly than what we're doing with our current STI epidemic. And of course, it's affecting not only the mothers and their partners, but also any children that they're having as well potentially. So I mean, I think that was a really interesting model. how do we replicate that? How do we get that in? Does this start with this can't just be in the doctor's office. That can't just be in your office. It has to be in other areas as well. Sex education in schools and beyond. How do we do outreach to help with that in that regard? And again, it's the political. Again, I don't want to talk about politics here, but some of it is, there is that overlay of some of the political issues going around as well that I think is tamping down or suppressing some of that education in a really honest, forthright sort of way.
Yeah, interesting. BD did join into the Mpox fight by rapidly developing a test for that. I think
Right.
some of the differences there is that the people who had that had symptoms and there was visible signs, and they were able
Okay.
to share photographs and other images of what it looked like, which we saw in television, in the news, and in social media. Um,
Right.
so there are a couple STIs that you can see visually, like
Right.
condyloma acuminata or venereal warts, but most of the ones that we're talking about, gonorrhea, chlamydia, trichomoniasis, syphilis, HIV, there's nothing to see, and people aren't sharing sexually related diseases as freely as they might have with Mpox. So I think
Okay.
that part of the problem is that people tend to keep quiet about sexually transmitted infection because it's right there in the name. How did I get this? It's not.
Yeah.
It's not because
Exactly.
I attended a concert and got COVID. That sounds fairly innocent.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the problem. It's been the problem. It's the problem with HIV back 40 years ago. There's the social stigmas that are attendant with that, and certainly that is maybe something that might be something we need to. Maybe that's something we need to address once we get the infections under control a bit. I think being more forthright and open about these issues, I think, is certainly a way to help get over it. So, all right. So certainly, education is a big thing, and we're not going to solve that today. But one thing we can talk about is solutions. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about testing. So what are some of the technologies that are making a difference in STI testing that's being provided to healthcare professionals and labs? So what are those tests out there? Are there any new ones? At-home testing, new rapid testing, new tests for different diseases. What's out there what can we add to the laboratory toolbox here?
So BD has developed molecular tests for chlamydia, gonorrhea, and trichomoniasis, which are on an instrument that's kind of a mid-volume that you could find in a small lab, but it also can be in a large clinical practice. And then we also have that now on our large high throughput fully automated device, the BD Core device. Within the office type setting, that instrument could give results the same day. And then we were also in the forefront of developing molecular testing for vaginitis, which could be bacterial vaginosis or Candida, also known as yeast or trichomoniasis. That test is also on both our Max instrument, mid-size, and our large high throughput core instrument. So that's where we've been advancing. We still have our decades old Affirm test, which was a point of care test for vaginitis as well. And then we continue to develop other rapid molecular point of care testing. That's probably the future.
Mm-hmm.
We can use one swab to test for all of these things, and that swab can be self-collected. So, as you know, self-collection is getting a lot of attention, boosted by COVID somewhat. So we're very interested in supporting both self-collection and in some areas self-testing. In this area, because of the sophistication of the tests, you need a lab.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So I always like to leave our discussions with what the audience can do to be part of the solution. So, how can CLP's laboratorian listeners help to improve testing for STIs? I mean, is there anything they could do? Is this I don't know, can they evangelize in some ways? Can they help work with healthcare providers to help them get the word out, get instruments like the ones you were talking about out there in the labs or in the offices, and help them reach women that need it the most?
Yeah, Chris, my own experience with that is quite positive, and it's tied to the electronic medical record, which the vast majority of clinicians are using now. So the EMR can help us be better clinicians by reminding us to do things and prompting us. So it's pretty easy to program it based on age, risk factor, or another diagnostic code that I put in to ask me if I want to order STI screening, and then that can be batched into a code. So my own experience is the lab folks coming by the office to chat with me, to raise my awareness, to make sure that I have the right codes, to help me put in prompts to make sure that I am doing optimal testing for my patients. So I think that relationship is very important.
Okay, great. Well, with that, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. Jeff, thanks again for taking the time to speak with me. I think we covered a lot of really important issues here, and certainly is a critical issue of our time. I also want to thank you, the laboratory audience, for listening. Look for more episodes of Clinical Lab Chat in the future, and visit us online at clpmag.com and on all of the major social media platforms. So until then,